We are late, ladies and gentlemen. It's 6:02. I tell you, my gavel's bigger than yours. I'm calling the January 20 meeting of the Bastrop Planning and Zoning Commission meeting to order. Easy for me to say. Vivi, would you please call the roll?
Yes, Madam Chair. Debbie Moore. Here. Glenn Johnson.
Here.
Cynthia Meyer.
Here.
Matt Lassen. Here. Ishmael Harris.
Here.
Pablo Serna.
Here.
Ed Scornelis.
Here.
Thank you. We have a full day today. And item 1A is Mr. Ken Flynn, and we welcome you and want to hear a little bit from Jennifer, and then we'd like to hear a little bit from you.
Okay. So we'd like to introduce Ken Flynn. He's our interim planning director. He started 2 weeks ago, and he's been a great help. He's helping us get organized, helping with the new code, figure out our direction on what we need to tackle first on helping everyone understand the code. So he can give him a little background about himself.
So I know you were spoken of with glowing terms, and you have experience a great deal. But for those viewing at home who may not know who you are, please tell us a little bit about your background.
Okay, I'm Ken Flynn. I currently live in Fort Worth, and I have come here. As an interim, I've done some interim work in 3 or 4 cities in the last few years. Part of that, I have a background working for 8 different cities in the Dallas-Fort Worth area mostly. I've worked for small cities, large cities, and then I've also got about almost as much time in my career working in the private sector, working as a developer. I had a development company that developed residential subdivisions, and I worked for 4 other development companies, commercial, retail development, and what have you. So I've also done a lot of public-private partnership work, working in economic development and facilitating some pretty innovative, larger projects that required public participation in the project. So I will say that this community has more on the ball, more going on than any town this size has a right to. Okay, it just amazes me in the short time that I've been here, and I probably wouldn't have shown up my second week but for the staff that you've got. You've got a phenomenal staff. I wouldn't have even come back. So I am form-based code certified, but I've never implemented a form-based code. I commend y'all on taking the leap, and then I think that we're going to have a very interesting and challenging road ahead implementing it, and I'm here to help y'all do that and work through that. So I think it's going to be fun.
Well, welcome aboard, and your experience in public and private, and also as a developer will be invaluable to us, and we appreciate you coming on board.
Well, thank you. I look forward to the experience.
Thank you. Appreciate it. And I want to acknowledge the fact that we have a new board member since our last meeting. Ed Scornelis is now with us. Known Ed and his wife for a long time. She's from Louisiana, so she's got to be a good person. And I've served with Ed on other boards. He's been on Main Street, BAIPP, and chaired the group looking at our cultural arts district. So he has a great deal of experience in our town. So welcome. We look forward to working with you. All right, item 2, citizen comments. Do we have anyone here who would like to make citizen comments on anything that is not on the agenda?
Not at this time, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Then we'll skip over number 2, and we will go directly to item number 3, items for individual consideration. Item 3A, consider action to approve meeting minutes from the November 21, 2019 meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission. And we will be considering the revised minutes. Are there any corrections, additions, deletions to the revised minutes? If not, I'll entertain.
I'll move to adopt the revised meeting minutes for the November 21st.
There's a motion. Thank you, sir. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? It passes unanimously. Thank you much. Item 3B, presentation on the comprehensive plan, Chapter 5, land use and community image, and discussion on changes to the future land use map and descriptions to reflect the Bastrop Building Block B3 Code, character districts, and place type zoning districts. Ms. Bills.
Good evening. So, as we all know, we adopted our new Bastrop Building Block Code in November. And one of the steps that we need to now consider is amending our future land use plan. So with the adoption of the B3 codes, we adopted new zoning districts. So our place type zoning districts that we adopted superseded our existing zoning districts that we had about 30 of in the old zoning code. Our comprehensive plan 2036, which was adopted in 2016, has chapter 5 that has a future land use plan with different character areas that describe different uses that should go in those areas and different zoning districts, but they all refer to the previous zoning districts, so this is something we need to update. This is anticipated to be done in-house by staff, so because we're looking at just kind of a narrow scope within the comprehensive plan, not trying to redo that entire chapter, but specifically to the future land use. So kind of taking a step back, I do know we have several new people. It's been a little bit since we've adopted the comp plan. Why do we have a comp plan? So our comprehensive plan is something that's allowed in the local government code, chapter 213. And the purpose is for planning your city in the long term, especially related to your public health, safety, and welfare. You can include topics such as land use, transportation, public facilities, along with many others. They can be one plan, they can be several plans, and these are used to establish your development regulations. So every time we come with a new zoning district and you're trying to figure out if that's appropriate to that area, we look to the comp plan first. The comp plan that was adopted in 2016 has 9 chapters. Well, the one in particular that we're looking at right now is the future land use and community image chapter. This chapter is broken down into 4 kind of topic areas. The first had an existing development patterns kind of study in 2016 that looked at what was on the ground in that 2014-15 to kind of establish where we were and to figure out how to move forward. The second area is the actual future land use plan and map that defines the character areas and where they are in the city. The character areas goes into more in-depth what should be allowed, what kind of development patterns, what zoning districts should be in each one of those areas. And then the last is community image. And what we're specifically proposing to look at is the future land use plan and map and the character areas section of this code, or the plan.
And one thing I'd like to say too is this was only adopted after numerous public meetings, after numerous, we didn't have rodeos back then, but we reached out to the general public, and there was a representative from every board, every commission in the city that participated as kind of like the steering committee. And we all met over, how many months was it?
I think it was
Seemed like
15.
Yeah. And so this is not something that was adopted just because Jennifer thought it was a good idea to do this. I mean, there was a lot of public input. What do you want to see in 20 years? Where would you like to see the parks? Where would you like to see the roads and the arterials and the feeders and the little streets? And it went from A to Z. The comp plan was very much discussed, and I commend the city and the leaders for the time that was spent, and we might say that our mayor chaired that whole thing. So he did a darn good job. So anyway, please go on.
So here's, kind of going off the screen, here's our future land use map. So this gives you an idea of what is, kind of how it's kind of laid out. It's laid out by kind of character areas is what we're calling them in this plan. They go from parks and open space as the darker green all the way up to the purple is industry. So it kind of segments the different use by use. So you go from your parks and open space, your rural residential, to your more intensive residentials, to your commercials. And it separates it out by use, which is, we kind of diverted from that in our new building block code because it's form-based. So that's one of the things we're going to have to look at as we update this map. The future land use plan character areas were further described. Each character area is broken down with the description, the representative land uses, what kind of things can go in that area, the representative zoning districts. So when you're looking at rezoning a site, seeing if that's an appropriate use for that character area, and then recommended development patterns. This gives you, and I provided this in the packet, this is the character area detail. This one's specifically for parks and open space. So it breaks it down, describes what parks and open space looks like, describes different things that'll be in there. You'll have, play fields, pools, civic facilities for recreation. And then appropriate zoning districts that you would have in this area would be agricultural and planned developments usually. That's where we allowed parks in our previous zoning districts. And then recommended development patterns, how those would be built in those areas. So with the Bastrop Building Block Code, that's why we say B3 code, we established character districts as part of the process and in the code that are defined by the natural landscape, existing development patterns, and the historical context of the area that helps inform the development as it's moving forward. These are used when looking at development to coordinate what kind of place types and what percentages of place types are allowed, what kind of street types are appropriate in that area, and the different building and block types that could be allowed within that area. So this is the character district map as it was adopted into the B3 code. So you can see this one is not different colors scattered about the city, but different colors grouped together into areas because you were kind of grouping development patterns together and development areas together rather than specific uses. So for instance, you've got your downtown that has your downtown districts and your old town districts, which those development patterns vary greatly from your Seton, where Seton Hospital is, see what I'm on, being built out in this part of town with new development. So these character districts and their descriptions inform the kind of development that's going to happen in those areas based on the form. We drill down another step and then we go to the place type zoning districts, and these are the actual parcel by parcel that got rezoned in the process of adopting the code. That informs what kind of vague uses you can do there, and more specifically what type of buildings you need to have and block structures you need to have in each of one of those place types. So like I said, our last code we had 30 different zoning districts. It was very granular. Some of the standards didn't vary much. Sometimes it was just height was the only thing that was different between C1 and C3, or C2. So we collapsed those down into 8 place type zoning districts, which are listed on the right. And these are defined by form. So you're going to have your natural forms, your rural forms, your neighborhoods, your mixed commercial and neighborhood areas, and your core commercial areas are your main areas. And you'll have your civic spaces that'll need to be included as larger developments occur. Percentages of those developments will need to be civic space that includes parks or recreation facilities. Your employment centers will be for those bigger uses that come in that have a specific development pattern that doesn't always adhere to our block form and building types. And then for the planned developments, we left those in place also. All the established planned development districts are still reflected in the place type zoning. So these are all the new place type zoning districts that need to be reflected within our future land use plan when we're considering what to rezone someone. And you can see our various shades of purple map here that we spent a lot of time on, that we spent more time on tweaking in November. So we're all probably fairly familiar with that.
I have a question.
Sure.
I know we were able to, for that area, put an overlay for I'm trying to name it,
LCRA
LCRA
property.
property. Where is that going to be? I know that's probably the only one.
Currently, it's the only one. We did set it up into the code that it's an overlay district, so there's the potential, if in the future that becomes something the council would want to pursue, you could do additional overlays with specific standards attached to them. but only, I think, in very specific instances.
So that language is, where is that at? It's not part of this, right? The overlay?
No, it'll be, I think we haven't had a chance to update the map to get that on there quite. It'll be actually on here. It'll show as a zoning overlay.
Okay.
So yeah, it will be part of this map. And all it did was add a couple of additional restrictions to the P4 category. That was the underlying zoning district for that property. So what we're here to start the discussion on tonight is considerations for this update. So some of the things the staff's already identified as kind of where we want to go with this is, one, we want to rename the character areas to some kind of other category description, because right now we have character areas for the future land use, and then we have character districts in the code, and those sound a little confusing. So probably come up with just another title for those in the future land use plan to differentiate between the two. The second is we recommend kind of looking at the B3 code character districts that are already established in the B3 code and expanding upon those in the future land use plan to use those as our basis for establishing the new future land use categories. Since the old future land use plan did speak more to the Euclidean, separated uses zoning we had before, we need a character or future land use categories that will translate more easily into the place types. The other, we'll have to expand the categories into the statutory ETJ, our extraterritorial jurisdiction, which goes 1 mile around the city limits, because our character districts within the B3 code only covered the city limits. And another thing we just were throwing out there is in the comp plan, that was not considered to expand any of the future land use into the voluntary ETJ. It only covers the statutory ETJ. And with kind of our, look towards potentially, establishing subdivisions more on a block, a street grid format, maybe expanding some of the future land use plan into the voluntary ETJ as well as the statutory. Just something for consideration. It may be a bigger undertaking than we want to do at this time. And it was in the half study, they kind of identified that 1 mile as kind of the immediate growth area that over the next 10 years. Voluntary ETJ is probably a further out goal for the city. So any questions on this, thoughts, direction?
How far out is the voluntary ETJ?
So the voluntary ETJ is, people opted into this voluntary ETJ in the 80s. So it's different. It's not a contiguous set of property. They're contiguous to each other, but there's lots of holes. Some of it goes all the way to the Travis County line. That being said, we have an interlocal agreement with the county that we've divided up that area into an Area A and an Area B. The city regulates the subdivision in Area A. The county regulates the subdivision in Area B. Sum total, the entire ETJ with the statutory and voluntary is 145 square miles. The city, by contrast, is I think 9.5 square miles. It's one of the largest ETJs in the state. So,
And as a little background, that was because Travis County and Austin was interloping into Bastrop County, and citizens rose up and said, "Oh, no, you're not." So,
and Austin is actually in Bastrop County today. Their ETJ has, with the 130 and the Formula One tract, it has pushed into the county now. So,
when did that happen?
it's about 3 or 4 years ago.
How can they do that?
It's any areas that aren't in our voluntary ETJ. The people who did not opt in, every time they push out their city limits, they get, I think, a 5-mile ETJ. So it just pushes out and has come into the Bastrop County area.
Ms. Mills, was the voluntary ETJ with any conditions? I mean, the statutory, I assume, is based on the local government code provisions. Are there the same provisions for the voluntary ETJ, or were there special council?
There were no special conditions with the annexation of those voluntary areas, and according to local government code, ETJ is ETJ, so it's all, at the end of the day, Bastrop, City of Bastrop ETJ. The interlocal agreement is what defines who's the regulatory authority in that area with the county.
Is there any way out? I mean, if we start regulating, can you de-annex yourself?
People can request de-annexation, and that's something council would have to
Okay.
consider and
But,
approve.
okay, so the council would have to approve somebody that voluntarily came
Yeah.
in to leave, they've got to have permission.
Yes, because a lot of those areas, when they were voluntarily annexed into the ETJ, were large ranch tracts and all that, and have since then have been subdivided and are owned by entirely different people. So, and they still are under the purview of the extraterritorial jurisdiction. So.
Well, am I correct that the legislature passed a bill that there's no more involuntary annexation?
It makes involuntary annexation extremely difficult for cities. It allows property owners to basically vote whether or not they want to be annexed. So I don't know if it's impossible, but it's very hard.
Anything else? Thank you.
Any other, this is the end, this is all I got for you tonight. I just kind of wanted to throw out this topic, kind of reintroduce this section of the comp plan, see if anyone had any questions on it. As we move forward, we'll be bringing you recommendations as staff starts to rewrite this section. So any direction you guys have on that?
The only thing I'd say is, I think the last time we met, we were looking at and this was still in our city limits. We were looking up further past on Main Street, and there really hadn't been done a lot of consideration about how that was going to be planned out. Mm-hmm. And my question is, when we're looking at something, I mean, is there going to be any future planning if we do bring in the ETJs like that? And right now, I think what I'm understanding is we're going from what was on the future land use plan to something that's more representative of the B3, correct?
Yes.
And the B3 hasn't gone out that far, so
our character districts are that.
Right. And
Our
we're
future
going
land use
another mile out.
Yeah, that.
So if that's going to be the case, how is that going to be figured out? That's my question.
Yeah, so so staff's kind of started to look at this. There are some character districts that I think we could expand on the edge, look at the area around it. There's going to be some logical areas that it obviously goes beyond the city limits, but I think we're going to have to propose some additional new districts, and it may be as simple as keeping it pretty high level, because a lot of those areas are still very rural. So most likely we'll probably be proposing some character areas or future land use categories that are going to reflect that as you move further out, it's going to become more rural. Of course, you've still got some, if excess ranch ever does develop, that's the property right at the top. So you will have some areas that could potentially, and those are the things we'll consider, which is what they did when they did this plan. What's already going on in that area, and what the likelihood that in the next 10 to 20 years that area is going to either develop into a denser residential area or stay a more rural farm or residential area.
Could there be an instance where someone wants to get a jump on that and they present something they want to, instead of going for something that's not as dense, they want something dense and they bring it to us and we'd have to consider that?
During this process? I don't know during this process that's going to be a good time to do that. As development comes in, that's always an option, that if your development does not comply with the future land use plan, you can request a future land use amendment, which does come before the planning and zoning and goes to city council.
But then I guess the staff then will be thinking about it in that direction, so
Yeah.
their recommendation would be something, already thought out.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Nope, not at this point.
No? Thank you.
Sure.
I think some of your changes of your nomenclature and districts and all of that'll help me, I know. Thank you. All right, we move on now to item 3C. hold a public hearing and consider action to recommend approval of an ordinance of the City Council of the City of Bastrop, Texas, adopting updates to the development manual in compliance with the Bastrop Building Block B3 code, including updates to the plat checklist, site development plan checklist, and creating a municipal utility district, or MUD, public improvement plan checklist, and amend Article 4.2 of the B3 technical manual to refer to the requirements outlined in the development manual and forward to City Council for approval. Ms. Land.
Good evening. All right, so that was a really, really wordy way of saying we have two checklists that needed some updates, and we created a new one. And then we are removing some redundancy in the tech manual. So the development manual, you guys probably remember this, but for those of you that are kind of new to the commission, the development manual outlines a lot of the development processes and provides checklists that dictate your submittal requirements and requirements that are on the plans for whatever you're submitting. So for instance, what is required to be shown on your plat? And what documents are required to be turned in with your plat application. All right.
And we, at the last legislative session, in their infinite wisdom, the legislature passed a bill that requires that from the date of acceptance to the date of, if it's not acted on within 30 days, it's approved.
Right.
So what that meant, that the staff had to go back and determine when something was accepted. It used to be you could work with developers, but with this drop dead date, you can't do that anymore. So they're going to require that things are much more complete when they are technically accepted.
Right.
So that we'll have a chance to look at what we need to, and council will have a chance to look at what they need to within that 30-day gap. So this is the need for the checklists and fine-tuning the checklists and the like. So,
Right.
a little
Yes,
background for new folks.
Yes, and also one of the other new requirements is we have to cite the code that issues the requirement. So between having the checklist codified as well as the code, you have a real easy reference, both for the applicants of what's applicable and what the expectations are, as well as for staff to review and be able to easily cite what is required. So with that, any questions on why we have checklists so far? No? Okay.
I'm curious, can you briefly state what the changes were? I mean, there are two very detailed checklists that I was looking
Yes.
at late at night and with a lot of coffee in me. And not knowing what the original checklist was like, I wasn't quite sure what the changes were, and then there was a created checklist, and I assume it came from some other form, and I just like to kind of see, I'm always used to looking at red lines to see what the changes are and how they fit in with the new
Yes, and
legislation.
Yeah, with the formatting of the checklist, we kind of lost the red line. But yes, I can definitely go over those. So on the plat checklist, which should be the first one in your packet, so on both the site plan checklist and on the plat checklist, we had some typos and just some things that were worded in ways that we've gotten a lot of questions on, so we've clarified that language. That's just throughout, small things here and there. So I won't detail all of those. But we did add some notes that are applicable to plats in the ETJ. So if you flip to the standard plat notes section on it starts on page 4, but page 6 details the standard plat notes for the extraterritorial jurisdiction. And all we had on the checklist before was plat note, was number 28 there. A Bastrop County development permit is required prior to any site development. But that didn't adequately cover our common situations in the ETJ. And so we needed to be able to have something to say, hey, you do actually need to put this plat note on there. And those are plat notes when applicable in the toad habitat. So there are some plat notes if you're in the habitat conservation area, that acknowledge the toad habitat and permitting requirements and such through that area. And then we have you state which ETJ you are in, whether that's the statutory or the voluntary, like Jennifer just described to you guys. And then there is in our interlocal agreement with the county, it talks about acceptance of roads and becoming county roads versus staying in private ownership. And so we have a plat note that reflects that agreement as well. The other major update to the plat checklist is we had in the signature blocks, they weren't quite right on which one was required when, so we just updated those to reflect, you know, who's the approval authority is for each one. And there were also some missing requirements that we said were not required for amending and minor plats that really should be. You know, so every plat should state who your utility provider is. And we are evaluating drainage on every plat as well. And so one of our X's that was missing that says, yes, this is required, did not cover amending plats. So we added that back in. And those are the updates to the plat checklist.
That answer your question, Mr. Johnson?
Yes, I think so.
Thank you.
All right. With that, we will move on to the site development plan checklist. This one, we lost the fire department's required general notes when we adopted this last time. I think we just lost it in a Word to PDF conversion, so we added those back in. And then after the B3 code was adopted, we updated the fire codes from the 2009 fire codes to the 2018 fire codes. So, you know, the required fire department table and fire code references we updated to 2018. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we had a couple, you know, common questions, and we clarified some language for our applicants.
If they have to get a certificate of compliance, if they're doing a site plan in the Iredell district, is that on here for clarification? So
no, because we usually check, it should be probably, yeah. Since we do have, we do ask for architectural elevations, and that would cover exterior building materials at that point. So yes, we should probably add that. We can make that update, yeah, if you so choose.
well, I'm thinking that, you know, if I'm developing and I don't know that, and I go through the whole process, and then I find out I have to do that, then I'll be like, why wasn't it on the checklist?
Valid point.
So it will be added.
All right.
That's on the 5, I guess, right? Building elevation sheets. Yeah, I probably would put it there.
Yes. Yes, we should probably put a note in there, you know, if you are in the Iredell Historic District.
Also
or
on the lighting
downtown,
plan?
or the commercial, Bastrop Commercial District, exterior building materials will be regulated.
Also on that lighting plan, is there, are they gonna, I guess it says photometric plan. It doesn't really say that they have to meet that guideline, I guess, that we have in the book, you know, the foot candle count.
Oh, so it's just the requirement for the plans. Yeah, so that's the requirement for the plan. We still do have the code reference that we can make,
Okay.
you know, get to
Again,
it that
trying
way.
to make it easy for them to know that they gotta go
Right.
meet that standard.
Yeah, so this kind of lays out the expectations, and then, you know, some details. You know, you still have a whole code
Oh, yeah.
finder to.
Some cities
to
are
back that up,
requiring that
so.
one to be stamped also by an engineer.
Okay, yeah, our code doesn't
Yeah,
require that.
the lighting plan, okay.
So-
Anything else?
Any other comments
Any
on
other
site
questions or
plans?
comments?
I have a comment, but not about this list, but I have a general question.
Okay,
But it's not about this list, so.
all right. Do you want to hold it until
Yeah.
after the mud checklist? All right. So the MUD checklist, MUDs are municipal utility districts, and we have, a couple of these in our ETJ, so we regulate their subdivision authority, and to some extent they have specific standards that are in their consent agreements with us. And so sometimes they follow City of Bastrop standards, sometimes they follow slightly modified standards. So when we were trying to apply the regular public improvement plan checklist in these areas, there were some points of contention, because it would be things like, okay, you have to use the City of Bastrop standard detail, or say City of Bastrop is your water provider, but that may not be the case in the MUD. The whole point of a MUD is they provide their own utilities. So this checklist gives staff the flexibility to properly reflect what's in the consent agreement and how those standards are being applied. So it references, a lot of it is very similar to the normal public improvement plan checklist, but it allows, all of the plans to reflect who is the utility provider, say that person, that entity's name instead of City of Bastrop. You can use specific notes for their MUDs and their adopted standards by other agreements. And it gives staff better flexibility to properly apply public improvement plan comments specific to their development.
Any questions or comments? Okay, thank you.
All right.
Move on.
All right. Any other general questions?
So, so these are I guess these are 3 checklists, right? And there's a pre-development checklist too?
So the development manual includes several checklists. We're just updating these 3 today.
And have we already moved on with the pre-development checklist?
Right, those are all adopted
That's all done.
as is. And we can always come back and update those later. We're just not proposing to do that at this time.
Okay.
So, yeah. And one other thing, the other thing in your motion regards 4.2 of the technical manual, which actually duplicated the entire plat checklist. So we are pulling that out of the technical manual entirely and just saying, plat standards, please refer to the checklist. That way we don't have duplicated and conflicting efforts.
Anything else before I open the public hearing? Thank you. This is the public hearing. Is there I will now open the public hearing. Is there anyone here who wishes to be heard? If not, I will close the public hearing and I will entertain a motion. Hello. Staff is recommending adoption.
I have a question. Is there a deadline? Is there a need to adopt this tonight so that we get it to City Council next meeting? Or
we are trying to be prompt with it because we do have to use this and lay out expectations, and we don't want to give improper guidance to any of our applicants, particularly with the plat checklist and even just the cleanup on the site plan checklist. We really need to be able to say, hey, yes, you do have to put these fire notes on there, and make sure that everybody is clear that we are under the 2018 codes and not the 2009 codes. We don't want to have a bad back and forth relationship with the applicant on, no, this is the code we're under, you have to follow it. I know we said to do it under a different code over here. It's confusing for applicants. The MUD checklist, we have several public improvement plans in the works and proposed to be submitted, particularly out in the colony. And so they are super excited, and as are we, to be able to get a checklist that reduces confusion and back and forth questions. And we would like to be able to properly follow all of our checklists.
so in other words, it's to reduce confusion that they after something's adopted, they will know what they need to do.
Yes.
And I suppose that if we have missed something or misstated something or included something we really don't need to have, we can come back and modify that as time goes
Yes.
on.
Yes, as we learn more things, we can always come back and update these again.
Okay, I mean, we're not setting anything in cement, okay.
It can always be changed.
That's right.
And quite often, you know, the pair of shoes you thought really looked good and they felt good after you wear them a while, not so much. So sometimes you just have to wait until you put things into practice before you realize that something else is needed or what we did is not needed. And developers and the planning department and everything else has been under a state of flux, changes in the last 2 years, beginning with the moratorium and subdivision changes, which were thrown out, and B3 came in, and they're trying to work with developers and make their pain less, not
Yes.
painless, but make their pain less, and get to where we're a department here that is trying to help folks get to yes and not say no so much.
Right.
And
We
the
really
sooner
wanna
we
be-
can get some of these checklists going, it will reduce the amount of time that people have to come up with something else that they didn't know they needed to submit. So that's where we are now, and hopefully this is the beginning of getting to yes.
Right, and
I-
this really
I-
lets us communicate upfront what the expectation is.
I move to adopt the proposed modified checklists as set forth in item 3C.
Is a motion, is there a second?
Second?
Would you please call the roll?
Absolutely, Madam Chair. Glenn Johnson,
Yes.
Cynthia Meyer,
Yes.
Debbie Moore,
Yes.
Matt Lassen, Ishmael Harris,
Yes.
Pablo Serna,
Yes, with the corrections to these, in certification, I mean, there was a slight change, but yes.
oh, okay. Ed Scarnellis,
Yes.
Yippee. It's unanimous. Thank you very much. Updates, number 4, item 4. Update on recent city council actions regarding planning department items.
Good evening. So we didn't have, at the last council meeting, there were no items that were forwarded from planning and zoning because we didn't have a December meeting. The last council meeting that items were considered was in December. November, December was the changes, modifications to the place type zoning map that came to planning and zoning and then went to council. The end results out of those three, we started with 12, some applicants pulled some, we got down to 8 that went on to council. And out of those 8, even though planning and zoning had recommended denial of a few of those, especially along Main Street, 7 of them did get adopted or approved, those zoning changes. The one that did not was for Tracy's Grocery. It was, council did not agree that that was a good change at this time, but they did approve the rezonings to P4 on Main Street north of the tracks for Ms. Fossler's property and the urban gardening project. So otherwise, all the rest of them that were recommended did get approved. So those have been the major updates since.
Thank you. Item 4B, individual requests from P&Z commissioners that particular items to be listed on future agendas. Does anyone have anything that they would like to see more discussion on? Doesn't have to be an item that needs action by council or anything, but if you want to know more about something or have more public discussion, now's the time. Hearing none. Thank you. I'll go move on to item 5.
Make a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn. Is there a second? Second. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed, stay here.